Since the Memorial Day massacre, we've had a pro-Israeli caller and someone who called me a Jew hater for siding with the people, the unarmed people in the international waters, bringing humanitarian aid that were ambushed by Israeli commandos. And I kind of lost my temper last week, or when that happened, and I didn't keep my cool. I kind of flew off the handle a little bit. But I just wanted to kind of take a few minutes to talk about Israel and to kind of do an education background to show that I'm not against Jewish people. It's the Zionists in Israel and the policies of the Zionist government that I oppose. Long ago, I was made to understand that Palestine was not Palestine. I was informed that Palestinians were not Palestinians, that neither existed. It was also explained to me that ethnic cleansing was not ethnic cleansing. And when naive old me saw freedom fighters, they patiently showed me that they were not freedom fighters and that resistance was not resistance, but terrorism. And when stupidly I noticed arrogance, oppression, and humiliation, they benevolently enlightened me. So I can see that arrogance was not arrogance, oppression was not oppression, and humiliation was not humiliation. I saw misery, racism, inhumanity, and a concentration camp. But they told me they were the experts in misery, racism, inhumanity, and concentration camps, and I have to take their word for it that this was not misery, racism, inhumanity, and a concentration camp. Over the years, they've taught me so many things. Invasion was not invasion. Occupation was not occupation. Colonialism was not colonialism, and apartheid was not apartheid. They opened my simple mind to even more complex truths that my poor brain could not on its own compute, like having nuclear weapons was not having nuclear weapons. Not having weapons of mass destruction was having weapons of mass destruction. And democracy in the Gaza Strip was not democracy. Having second-class citizens in Israel was democracy. So you'll excuse me if I'm not surprised to learn today that there were more things that I thought were evident that are not. Peace activists are not peace activists. Piracy is not piracy. The massacre of unarmed people is not the massacre of unarmed people. I have such a limited brain and my ignorance is so unlimited. And they're really so fucking intelligent. I mean, really. So let's look into the history of this. See, for centuries, there was no such conflict. In the 19th century, the land of Palestine was inhabited by a multicultural population, approximately 86% Muslim, 10% Christian, and 4% Jewish, all living in peace. In the late 1800s, a group in Europe decided to colonize this land. Known as Zionists, they represented an extremist minority of the Jewish population. Their goal was to create a Jewish homeland, and at the time they considered locations in Africa and America before settling on Palestine. So if God gave them a right, how come they had to choose between so many different places before they decided where that land was that God gave them? At first, this immigration created no problems. However, as more and more Zionists immigrated to Palestine, many with the express wish of taking over the land for a Jewish state, the indigenous population became increasingly alarmed. Eventually, fighting broke out with escalating waves of violence. Hitler's rise to power, combined with Zionist activities to sabotage efforts to place Jewish refugees in Western countries, led to increased Jewish immigration to Palestine, and the conflict grew. Finally, in 1947, the United Nations decided to intervene. However, rather than adhering to the principle of self-determination of peoples, in which the people themselves create their own state and system of government, The UN chose to revert to the medieval strategy whereby an outside power divides up other people's land. Under considerable Zionist pressure, the UN recommended giving away 55% of Palestine to a Jewish state, despite the fact that this group represented only about 30% of the total population and owned under 7% of the land. While it is widely reported the resulting war eventually included 5 Arab armies, less well known is the fact that throughout this war, Israel forces outnumbered all Arab and Palestinian combatants combined, often by a factor of 2 to 3. Moreover, Arab armies did not invade Israel. Virtually all battles were fought on land that was to have been the Palestinian state. Finally, it's significant to note that Arab armies entered the conflict only after Zionist forces had committed 16 massacres, including the grisly massacre of over 100 men, women, and children at Deir Yassin. Further, future Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin, head of one of the Jewish terrorist groups, described this as splendid and stated, "As in Deir Yassin, so everywhere. We will attack and smite the enemy. God, thou hast chosen us for conquest." Zionist forces committed 33 massacres after that. By the end of the war, Israel had conquered 78% of Palestine. 750,000 Palestinians had been made refugees. Over 500 towns and villages had been obliterated, and a new map was drawn up in which every city, river, and hillock received a new name, a Hebrew name, as all vestiges of the Palestinian culture were to be erased. For decades, Israel denied the existence of the population. Former Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir once saying, "There was no such thing as a Palestinian." In 1967, Israel conquered still more land, following the Six-Day War, in which Israeli forces launched a highly successful surprise attack on Egypt. Israel occupied the final 22% of Palestine that eluded it in 1948, the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Since according to international law, it is inadmissible to acquire territory by war, these are occupied territories and do not belong to Israel. It also occupied parts of Egypt that it returned, and Syria, which remain under occupation to this day. Also, during the Six-Day War, Israel attacked a U.S. Navy ship, the USS Liberty, killing and injuring over 200 American servicemen. President Lyndon Johnson recalled rescue flights, saying that he didn't want to embarrass an ally. In 2004, a high-level commission chaired by Admiral Thomas Moore, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, found this attack to be an act of war against the United States.